He didn't have a claim on her. That was the detail Cillian Mace had never bothered to examine, because, examining, it would have meant admitting that Gwen Farrell existed somewhere outside the scope of his ledgers, that she had a life which did not begin and end at the sound of his office door. Mace had built his empire on precision. He knew to the cent what everything within his reach was worth. He knew which harbour master could be acquired for 35,000 and which one required 55. He understood, intimately, the exact threshold at which a man's unpaid debt became useful leverage. He had not, apparently, thought to calculate the cost of his own assumptions. Gwen had come to him 4 years ago through a referral that was less a recommendation and more a quiet warning. She knows what numbers actually mean, not just what they say. She'd been 24, in a blazer 2 sizes too large, borrowed from a cousin, her CV printed on the cheapest paper the Staples on Dundas Street West had stocked. She hadn't flinched when Mace outlined the nature of the work. The shell companies, the layered holdings, the particular art of making revenue that had never touched a cash register appear legitimate by the time it reached a bank statement. She had simply asked what the filing deadlines were. He'd doubled her asking salary. She'd accepted without blinking. 4 years. She sat now at the long desk outside his private office on the 31st floor above Bay Street, the city spread grey and cold beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass. She wore a dark olive cardigan over a white blouse. Her hair was always pulled back, a ruthlessly practical bun at the base of her skull. There was a small scar on her left hand, just below the knuckle, from a childhood she never discussed. She drank her coffee black and finished it before it cooled. She had the quiet, coiled efficiency of someone who had learned very early that time was not a renewable resource. It was 5:20 in the afternoon. She appeared in the doorway of his office without knocking. She never knocked. The Pemberton Group confirmed the wire for Thursday, she said. The offshore allocation needs your signature by end of business tomorrow, or the holding window closes. She set a manila folder on the edge of his desk with a precise, flat snap. I've flagged the line items, yellow tabs. Mace didn't look up from the document he was reviewing. Run me through the Beaumont exposure. Already adjusted. I moved the liability offshore through the numbered company in the Channel Islands and offset it against the Scarborough property portfolio. Net exposure is 11% of what it was Monday. She paused. You're welcome. He looked up then. She was already turning toward the door, her leather folio tucked under one arm. Where are you going? Home. She said it the way someone states a fact that requires no defense. Mace set his pen down. The Beaumont restructuring isn't closed. The parts that require me aren't closed, Gwen said without turning around. The parts that require you are. The summary is on page 3, tabbed in orange this time, since you ignored the yellow last Tuesday. She glanced back over her shoulder. I'm leaving at 5:30. I have somewhere to be. He studied her. She had her coat already in her hand, charcoal wool worn at the left cuff. She'd had it since before she came to work for him. Somewhere, Mace repeated. It's a personal matter. Her tone was courteous. It was also a wall. Good night, Mr. Mace. The door closed behind her. The latch clicked with a quiet finality that felt, for reasons he refused to examine, louder than it had any right to be. By 7 o'clock, the Beaumont figures had started blurring at the edges. He blamed the overhead lighting. He blamed the 3 hours of sleep he'd managed in the last 48. He did not blame the absence of the woman who usually brought him a second espresso at 6:30 without being asked, who knew he took it with no sugar, who had once, without comment, removed a contract from his hands and pointed to a clause that would have cost him $4 million by morning. He found himself standing in front of her desk in the empty outer office at 7:15, looking at the perfectly aligned surface. Her monitor was off, her pencils were in their cup. A single sticky note was adhered to the edge of her keyboard. Beaumont, PG3, orange. Don't skip it this time. He didn't know why he opened her bottom drawer. He told himself it was the Pemberton reference numbers. There was no Pemberton file in the bottom drawer. There was a small brown notebook, the the cheap kind sold in drugstores, its cover bent slightly at the corner from use. He stood there for a long moment. The hum of the building's ventilation system was the only sound in the room. He opened it. The first 30 pages were work, her shorthand, a private cipher of abbreviations and numerical flags he'd learned to read over the years. Then the writing changed. Shorter. Personal. A grocery list, a note to call someone named Bev, and near the back, in handwriting more deliberate than her usual rapid script. Dinner, Thursday, 7 p.m., Distillery Hale. Mace stood very still. The Distillery District. Candles and exposed brick and wine lists that came in leather folios. It was not a place you went to discuss business. It was a place you went when you wanted the evening to mean something. He checked his watch. It was 7:22. He closed the notebook. He replaced it in the drawer with the same precision he applied to everything. He walked to the coat rack by the door, pulled on his overcoat, black wool, heavy, and walked to the elevator. He told himself he was going because he needed to speak with her about the Pemberton timeline. The lie tasted exactly like what it was. The December air off the lake had teeth. Mace stood on the cobblestone outside the restaurant's wide front windows, his breath making small clouds in the dark. The distillery was quiet on a Thursday in winter. A few couples moving between the lit-up buildings, their boots loud on the stone, scarves wrapped against the wind coming off Ontario. He found her through the glass in under a minute. She was sitting near the back, in a booth with warm amber lighting overhead. Her hair was down. He had not, in 4 years, seen her hair down. It fell past her shoulders in dark waves, catching the candlelight, and she looked younger, softer, like a version of herself that existed before whatever had made her so relentlessly armored. She was wearing a dark burgundy sweater. She was holding a glass of red wine, and she was laughing. Not the brief, controlled exhale she used when a meeting finally ended, or when he said something that missed the point by a particularly impressive margin. This was unguarded, real. Her head tipped back slightly with it, and the sight of it felt, to Mace, like something being taken from a room he hadn't known he was standing in. The man across from her was ordinary in the way that hits harder than it should. Somewhere around 30, sandy-haired, wearing a flannel shirt under a wax canvased jacket, he had the look of someone who spent time outdoors for reasons other than parking lots. He was leaning forward across the table, mid-story, gesturing with both hands. Gwen reached across the white tablecloth. She put her hand over his wrist, briefly, casually, and said something that made him laugh in return. Mace became aware that his jaw ached. He became aware, a moment later, that he had no right to feel what he was feeling, which was the specific corrosive fury of a man watching someone take something he had never admitted was his to lose. He stood in the cold and did not go inside. Going inside would have meant confronting the fact that he had followed his accountant across the city in the dark. And that was not a fact he was prepared to hold in broad light. He stood there until the windows fogged at the corners and his hands had gone numb inside his coat pockets. He memorized the other man's face, the slope of his nose, the easy way he sat, no tension, no habit of keeping the exit in his peripheral vision. A man who had never needed those habits. Mace turned and walked back to the waiting car. His driver, Mick, said nothing. He had worked for Mace for 11 years. He knew the particular quality of this silence, and he knew better than to touch it. "Waterfront," Mace said. Mick drove. The dossier was on Mace's desk by 6 the following morning. His name was Hale Kimber, 31, environmental consultant, independent operator, recently contracted with a municipal infrastructure group out of Hamilton. Good reputation, clean financial history, a lease on a one-bedroom in Leslieville, modest but stable. No debts that could be leveraged, no habits that invited pressure. He was unremarkably decent, and Mace found this personally offensive. He picked up his phone and called a man named Pruitt, who managed the private equity fund through which Mace laundered a significant portion of his construction revenues. The conversation was brief. The municipal infrastructure contract Hale Kimber had been hired under was administered through a consortium, one member of which owed Mace a debt that had been sitting idle for 2 years. Mace called it due. The contract was rescinded by noon, citing budget realignment. The formal notice reached Kimber at 12:47 p.m. By Thursday evening, the consulting firm that had brought him in had declined to comment on his future placement. By Friday, his project access had been revoked. Mace sat at his desk on Friday afternoon and felt, briefly, a cold satisfaction. Then Gwen walked in with the Pemberton Quarterly Summary and set it in front of him without looking up, and he noticed the tightness around her mouth. Not quite a frown, not quite controlled, and the satisfaction curdled. He did not ask, she did not offer. It was 11 minutes past 9 on the following Tuesday morning when Gwen stopped typing. She was processing the monthly invoices from the legal consortium Mace retained for his corporate restructuring. A tedious task, mostly a matter of matching billing codes against project files and flagging anything outside the standard rate structure. She was good at it, because she was good at everything she touched, and because she had learned early and permanently that the details other people skipped were where the real information lived. She was on page 11 of a 43-page invoice when a line item stopped her cold. 5.5 hours, environmental contract consultation, termination advisory, client file, a numbered holding she recognized, traced back to a private equity fund she knew the structure of intimately, because she had helped build part of that structure herself. Subnote: Kimber H., Municipal Project Exit Facilitation. She read it twice. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling and breathed very carefully through her nose. She pulled up the consortium's metadata through the back-channel system she used to track the syndicate's financial architecture. She found the numbered holding. She traced it to the equity fund. She pulled the call logs from the burner line Mace used for lateral communications. She maintained the encryption protocol and had always had access. She had simply never thought to look before. Friday, 84 a.m. 14 minutes, Pruitt's number. The municipal contract had been rescinded at 12:47 p.m. the same day. Gwen sat in the quiet of the outer office for a long time. The city moved silently beyond the glass. Somewhere in the building, an elevator chimed. She thought about Hale, Ernest, funny Hale, who had grown up 2 streets over from her in the East End, who had texted her twice since Thursday, and then gone quiet in the particular way that meant something had gone badly wrong. She thought about Mace's voice the evening she'd left early. Somewhere, the specific weight he had put into a single word. She thought about 4 years of 16-hour days, of knowing, with the particular certainty she had for these things, that she was not simply good at this job. She was the reason this job still existed. She had caught 3 catastrophic errors in Mace's own financial decisions before they became federal exposure. She had restructured 2 holdings that were hemorrhaging money inside corrupt contractor agreements. She had, on one occasion, rewritten an entire offshore trust structure overnight because the original drafter had overlooked a treaty clause that would have cost the syndicate its entire Cayman position. She had done all of this and asked for exactly what her contract specified. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk. She took out the brown notebook. She flipped to a blank page near the back and wrote 1 line in her precise, unhurried script. Then she tore the page out, folded it once, and slid it beneath the cover of the Pemberton Quarterly. She picked up the file. She walked to the mahogany door. She didn't knock. Mace was on the phone. He stood at the window the way he always stood, weight forward, one hand in his pocket, looking down at the city the way a man regards something he owns. He glanced back when she entered and held up one finger. She walked to his desk. She set the Pemberton Quarterly down. She smoothed the cover with one deliberate finger, a gesture she had never made before, and stepped back and waited. He ended the call. He turned. "Quarterly's early," he said. "I had time." She watched his hand reach for the file. She watched it stop when he saw the folded page resting on top. He picked it up. He unfolded it. 1 line in her handwriting: Kimber H. Municipal Project Exit Facilitation. Pruitt, Friday, 8:04 a.m. I know what you did. The silence in the room became very precise. Mace set the page down on the desk. He did not look at it again. He looked at her. Gwenon. Don't. Her voice was quiet. It was also the steadiest thing in the room. Don't tell me it was business. Don't tell me he was a liability or a loose thread, or that you were protecting an asset. I have been building those constructions for you for 4 years. I know every shape they come in. He said nothing. You had his contract pulled, she said, because you saw us having dinner, because he was there. He wasn't right for you. The words came out before he decided to say them, raw-edged, unplanned. Gwen looked at him the way you look at a man who has just said something in a language you are still deciding whether to learn. You don't have that information, she said. You don't know anything about what's right for me. You know my filing system and my coffee order, and the fact that I don't take lunch breaks. That's what you know. I know you, Gwen. You know what I'm useful for. She reached across his desk and picked up the folded page. She placed it in her jacket pocket. That's different. He moved around the desk. He moved the way he always moved, deliberate, heavy, but there was something different in it now. The calculation was gone. What was underneath was more exposed. I know, he said, stopping 3 feet from her, that you were born in Verdun, and you put yourself through school on scholarships and shifts at a diner on Saint Laurent, and you have not once, in 4 years, asked me for anything beyond what your contract specifies. I know you hate being condescended to more than you hate anything else in the world. I know you read the same page of whatever book is on your desk 4 times when something is bothering you, and you think no one notices. A pause. I notice. Gwen's expression did not change, but something shifted behind it, a tectonic thing, barely visible from the outside. Then you should know, she said carefully, that what you did to Hale is the kind of thing I cannot work around. I'll undo it. The words surprised him when he said them. She could see they surprised her, too. What? The contract. He held her gaze. It cost him something. She could see exactly what it cost. I make a call. It gets reinstated. His reputation stays clean. She studied him for a long moment. Why? It was not a question. It was a test. Because you'd find out regardless, he said. You always do. And because, he stopped. The room felt very small. Because you're the only person in my orbit who tells me when I'm wrong, and I was wrong. You were more than wrong, Gwen said. You were vindictive. You treated a civilian like a piece on a board because he sat across a table from me and you couldn't stand it. That's not a man exercising power. That's a man having a tantrum with institutional resources. I know. You don't get to just say you know. Then what do I get to do? She looked at him. She looked at the scar cutting through his left eyebrow, too old and familiar now to register as damage, just part of the grammar of his face. She looked at the tension in his hands, the way his knuckles stood out, the rigidity of a man holding very still because motion felt dangerous. You get to fix it, she said, today, with documentation so I can verify it. She reached into her jacket's interior pocket and withdrew a USB drive. She set it on the edge of his desk between them. I want you to understand something. I have been building a careful, complete record of this company's financial architecture for 4 years. Not to use. I was never going to use it. But you should understand that I could have walked out of here any day in those 4 years with enough to put you in Millhaven for 20 years minimum. She let that sit. I didn't. I stayed. I made your empire functional. I corrected your mistakes before they became federal exposure. That was a choice. Every single day, it was a choice. She met his eyes. I would like you to understand the weight of that. Mace looked at the USB drive. He looked at her. Why did you stay? He asked. His voice was different than she had ever heard it. The authority stripped out, leaving something much quieter underneath. For the first year, the salary. Gwen was quiet for a moment. The city moved soundlessly behind the glass. After that, I told myself it was professional integrity, that I was too deep in the architecture to leave cleanly. Another pause. I'm not sure I was being entirely honest. The air between them shifted the way air shifts before a storm commits to itself. Gwen. He said her name the way he had never said it before, not the clipped operational use, but something else, slower, like he was learning its actual weight. Don't say something you've constructed, she said without heat. If you can't say it plainly, don't say it at all. He was quiet for long enough that she heard the ventilation system cycle. She could see the effort of it. A man who had spent decades making every word a calculated instrument, being asked to lay the instruments down. I followed you, he said finally, to the distillery. I stood outside in the cold, and I watched you laugh at something he said, and I felt. He stopped. His jaw worked. I felt like I was watching something disappear that I had never had the sense to reach for. And instead of doing anything honest about that, I made a phone call. He looked at the USB drive on the desk between them. That was not a man exercising power. That was a man who was afraid. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Afraid. Gwen picked up the USB drive and put it back in her pocket. Make the call, she said. Kimber's contract reinstated today. Yes. And then she said, I want a meeting, Monday morning. You, me, and whatever passes for your legitimate legal counsel. We're restructuring my contract. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. More like the precursor to one, the terrain a smile crosses before it arrives. What terms? He asked. Better ones. She turned toward the door. I'll prepare the comparison figures over the weekend. You know by now I'm thorough. Gwen. She stopped, her hand on the doorframe. The dinner. His voice was careful, but not in the old way, not the cold control of calculation. This was more fragile. Was it? He's an old friend, she said, without turning. From my neighborhood, there was nothing there. She paused. But that's not actually the point. No, Mace agreed quietly, it isn't. She glanced back over her shoulder. The expression on her face was not quite forgiving, not quite warm. It was very specifically hers. A thing she had not borrowed from anyone, a thing no one could take. Call Pruitt, she said. I'll be at my desk. She stepped through the doorway. He listened to the precise rhythm of her footsteps on the hardwood. The quiet scrape of her chair, the soft percussion of her keyboard already moving, the sounds of a woman who had not left. Cillian Mace stood in his office and did not move for a long moment. He had spent years collecting things of value. He had catalogued leverage and debt and market position with the fastidious attention of a man who understood that everything had a price. He had not understood, until this moment, that the most precise accountant he had ever known had been keeping a ledger on him as well, and that the debt he owed her had never been financial. He picked up his phone. He dialed. By Friday of the following week, Hale Kimber's contract had been reinstated with a written apology from the consortium, citing an administrative error. His project access was restored. His reputation, whatever small shadow had touched it, was clean. Gwen confirmed it through her own channels. Contacts she had cultivated in the municipal planning office over 2 years, carefully, for exactly this kind of verification. She said nothing about it to Mace. She didn't have to. He knew she'd checked. Monday morning she arrived at 8:45 with 2 coffees. Black for him, black for herself, and a folder tabbed in blue. She set his coffee exactly where she always set it. She placed the folder on the left side of his desk and took the chair across from him without waiting to be invited. He reached for the coffee. He opened the folder. He read the first page and the second, and when he reached the third, he looked up at her over the edge of the paper. This is a partnership structure, he said. Yes. You're proposing equity. 15% of the legitimate holdings, she said. Structured as a consultancy stake, legally defensible. You've needed a clean co-owner of record on the Bay Street entity for 2 years. Your counsel told you last March and you ignored it. This solves that problem and mine simultaneously. He looked at the page. He looked at her. Your problem being, he said carefully. My problem being that I have been building someone else's empire without a stake in it. She held his gaze without effort. I'm not an assistant, Cillian. I never was. You just found it more comfortable to keep the title small. It was the first time she had used his given name. He felt it the way you feel an unexpected step in a dark room, a sudden rearrangement of where the ground is. No, he said quietly, you're not. He turned to the back page. He picked up his pen. He signed where she had already prepared the space for exactly this moment, because she had known, with the precisions she applied to all things, that he would. She took the folder back. She slid it into her leather folio. She stood, picked up her coffee, and walked toward the door. Gwen. She looked back. The winter light through the glass was catching her hair, still pulled up, still ruthlessly pinned, efficient as always, no apology in it. Thank you, he said, for not using the drive. She considered that for a moment. I told you I made a choice. She reached for the door handle. Don't make me reconsider it. The door closed. He heard her settle at her desk. He heard the keyboard begin, already moving, already ahead, already 3 steps into whatever the day was going to ask of her. Gwen Farrell had not taken anything. She had simply stopped pretending she didn't already hold it. That's what happens when the most dangerous person in the room has been doing everyone else's accounting. Eventually, she reconciles the books, including the ones no one thought she was keeping. Was it a reckoning? Was it a merger? Was it the beginning of something neither of them had a clean word for yet? She'd probably figure that out too. She was very thorough.